You know what time it is. It's time for the pursuit of progress. And that's right. Welcome back to the pursuit of progress, where we help you grow, improve, and become better every single day. I'm Ben, and joining me as always is my co-host Adam. And today we're unpacking a powerful productivity tool that can transform your daily decision making, the Eisenhower Matrix.
What is up, you guys? Yeah, if you ever felt super duper overwhelmed by tasks, wondering what you should tackle first, well, today we're diving deep into this Eisenhower Matrix, which is a powerful tool to help you make smarter decisions about where to focus your time and your energy. By the end of today's episode, you guys are going to know exactly how to categorize your daily tasks, prioritize efficiently and effectively, and make progress on what really matters. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we do, Ben, love to just hear how you're doing, man. What's going on?
Doing great. Glad to be back at it here. You know, when we talk about the Eisenhower Matrix, we have General Eisenhower, we have President Eisenhower, we have the Eisenhower Tunnel, and we also have the Eisenhower Matrix. And so, something that as you get a little more intentional, I realized this concept that we're going to discuss today, it is so important, but there's not always a lot of discussion around it. And it's like, how do you know what's most important? How do you know how to structure your day? We all have these different responsibilities, different tasks. This is going to help you break that down. So really, really excited to talk about it with our guest, also with you. But life's been good. How have you been the last week or two?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good. I missed you last week. You were out in Kansas, or I should say, Kansas City for the Big
That's right.
12 tournament. How was that?
A lot of fun. We got to see a incredible basketball tournament, a lot of basketball games the first 3 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 games a piece those first 3 days. And then on Friday, you have 2 games and then 1 game on Saturday. So a total of 15 games, 16 teams over 5 days. What's great is I haven't watched a lot of college basketball this year, but we got to see the number 2 team in the nation, Houston, who's also now a number 1 seed in the tournament. We got to see them play 3 times. We got to
And
see Kansas play, Texas Tech, and the Big 12 Player of the Year, J.R. Toppin, Iowa State. So many great teams, great basketball. And a couple of the sessions, we were 2 or 3 rows back. I don't know if you've ever sat that close, but when you are sitting that close and you can actually hear, the conversation on the court with the refs and the players, it's a totally different perspective to watching the game. And so that was just incredible.
it's really cool. And I also saw that you're out there with your brother and his kiddos, and I saw that you guys got to, or at least your niece got to meet Andy Reid, coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. He's such a great guy. I didn't know this, but he's a BYU alum. And so he was sitting courtside at the BYU game, and they had special security around him. So the kids tried to go over during a timeout break, and security shoot him off. And then during halftime, he told the security to ease up. And there was literally a line of people from the concourse all the way down the court side. So we're talking hundreds of people who were just in line to go get their photo taken. And they just kind of zigzagged their way all the way to the front, kind of cut the line and made sure to get a photo with Coach Reid. So super cool that he does that. I think being a public figure, this is the thing that a lot of us don't understand. For him, every time he goes out in public, something like that is going to happen where people are just going to want to stop, take their photo. And I think that would get very old very quick, if you're at the grocery store or at the mall or wherever. And so the fact that he's willing to do that and do it with a smile, he's just a great guy and a great coach for doing that.
Yeah, I think as far as coaches go, I probably look up to him more than almost anybody else, just with his track record, but also just his style of, he's not like a threatening, aggressive type. Maybe he gets like that behind closed doors, but just seems like he commands a certain level of respect. And I think that's just from his actions, just from his record with success over 40 years or whatever it is.
He certainly seems to be beloved by his players. When you watch the videos in the locker room, I mean, they seem to just really, really love him. So yeah, it was a really, really cool experience and awesome photo that I'm sure she'll cherish for the rest of her life.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, let's jump right into it. So just explain to me a little bit first off, like what is the Eisenhower Matrix? What's it about? Give me a little background.
Yeah, well, let me start off with this quote here. And this quote is from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this is what he said. He said, "I have 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important, and the important are never urgent. So, what does this mean, and what is the matrix? So, the Eisenhower Matrix is a simple but powerful framework, and it is named after President Eisenhower, known for being extremely productive during his presidency. So he was a general during World War II, and then became president. And despite his age, he was known for being incredibly energetic and extremely productive. And that's one of his most famous quotes. I have two kinds of problems: the urgent and the important. The urgent is never important, and the important is never urgent. And it's this same idea that Stephen Covey popularized in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the first step is just realizing that there is an incredible difference between something that's urgent and something that's important. And there are things that are urgent and important. We're going to break into that. But number one, you have to filter out and categorize. Is this urgent? Why is it urgent? Or is this important, and why is it important?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I think if you guys can get nothing else out of this episode today, just having a little bit maybe deeper awareness of this when you start to have, issues and just, obstacles, coming up against you with your day-to-day lives, just taking that extra step to really think, all right, is this really urgent? Is this important? And kind of almost just attacking every day like that, where I hopefully you either have a game plan from the night before, so that way when you start every day you have some direction on what you're starting your day off with, what kind of work you're starting with. But if you don't, I think this is a good thing to maybe start every day with. Just look at whatever you have on your agenda and what's important, what's urgent. And I guarantee the more you do this, the more you'll probably realize a lot of the stuff you thought was urgent probably maybe wasn't so much as you thought it was, or at least you can minimize that by just focusing more on this daily, focusing more on the important stuff on a daily basis.
That's right. And I think one of the first steps, and I know that you want to get into the quadrants here, but really quick, one of the first steps, like you said, is just being intentional, like learning how to be intentional and getting in touch with what your tasks are. And I think that's almost step zero. Identifying, writing down, what are you doing? What's taking up your time? Why are you doing these things? And starting to then evaluate, is this the best use of my time? Should I be doing this? Should this be delegated? I told you that I'm reading that book by Dan Martell, Buy Back Your Time. And I would say that a lot of these same concepts that we're going to talk about today are themes in his book, learning how to delegate. And so it's something, I would almost say that this is one of those things, people are always looking for shortcuts or secrets to get to the next level. And I would put this lesson today in that category, where if you can really master what we're talking about, this can have a transformational change in your business, your productivity, your personal and professional life. It can radically change your success and how quickly you're accelerating.
I love that. And as far as these quadrants go, you guys are just listening and not watching the video version. Just so if any of you guys don't know, we have video versions always every week available on YouTube. You can also catch the full video versions on Spotify. But as far as these quadrants, you guys can just kind of picture this in your head today. I'm not going to be putting this on a whiteboard or anything, but if you can just imagine 4 quadrants, upper left, upper right, bottom left, bottom right. The quadrant one, which I always like to put in the upper left, is what's called urgent and important. You always want to do these ones first. So these are just tasks that have immediate deadlines or immediate consequences. An example would be like paying overdue bills, maybe some emergencies came up at work, maybe even if personal life, maybe just some critical health concerns that you have. You can also just even take this a step further. Maybe it's just some of the goals that you have currently. Maybe one of them is getting in better shape. Maybe right now that falls into quadrant one. So, doing your workout in the morning, that becomes this, top priority at the time. Down the road, maybe some of those are going to change. So what you have in your certain quadrants might not always stay in that quadrant. It really just can be something that you address on a daily or weekly basis. So again, quadrant one is just the urgent and important. If you go to quadrant two, which is the upper right, that's important, but not urgent. These are what we call scheduling tasks. So these are things that are crucial for your long-term success, but they aren't pressing. An example of this would be, maybe certain things about like building up relationships, reaching out to your sphere if you're in a sales type position, personal growth activities. I mentioned exercise. So maybe that workout on a daily basis, maybe that actually could fall also into this quadrant two. This quadrant is really just where that significant progress happens. So you never want to neglect quadrant two. So we got quadrant one, quadrant two. The third quadrant, so the bottom left is how I always like to put it, is urgent, but not important. So these are the delegate or just try and reduce these tasks as much as possible. I like to focus more on the delegate portion. So these are just tasks that are demanding immediate attention, but have really little to no real impact. So they're not moving the needle towards any additional income maybe coming into your business. It's not something that's going to drastically change. However, it definitely is still really important. Examples of this would be like constant notifications, some of the meetings that maybe aren't necessarily essential, responding to emails, that kind of stuff. So, there's still value in them, but they're not super critical, important tasks. So that's, again, urgent, but not important. So it's important to, it's urgent to still be like responding to emails as an example. And then the fourth quadrant is neither urgent nor important. And this one is really fun because anything that goes into this fourth quadrant, you just need to eliminate, get rid of it. So these are things that are distractions or any tasks that might be procrastination based. Examples would be just, mindless scrolling on social media, maybe binge watching TV, just unnecessary busy work. And it's crazy just how busy you can make yourself by just having a lot of stuff in this fourth quadrant.
Bet you, I'm sure there's data out there that backs this up, but I would guess that if you looked at each quadrant by percentage of time that your average American spent on that specific quadrant, I bet you the vast majority of Americans would spend most of their time in quadrant four, which is neither urgent nor important. And that's also the same reason why 74% of adult Americans are overweight and 79% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck because we're doing things and we're living in a way that's not urgent or important.
Very well said. Yeah. I think it's also just an example of, I don't know, just people's perception of difficulty or just what they do or don't want to work on and do. Obviously the quadrant four is stuff that's easy to do. So you do it all the time. That quadrant one, quadrant two are things that maybe aren't fun, but need to be done. And those are the ones that are harder just to get that motivation to actually do. So, you guys, once again, we'll just kind of run through these four quadrants just to kind of recap. Quadrant one, urgent and important. Always do these ones first. Quadrant two, important, but not urgent. These are things you can schedule. Quadrant three, it's urgent, but it's not important. These are things you can hopefully delegate or reduce if at all possible. And then that fourth quadrant, neither urgent nor important. And at all costs, try and eliminate these. When I say eliminate, obviously everybody probably, likes to play on or have social media and spend some time on this. You don't have to necessarily completely eliminate it, but definitely just kind of at least create more of this awareness around this stuff just to, limit your time or make sure you're focusing on quadrant one and two first before you start putting any time and effort into quadrant three and four.
See Charlie in the back there telling us we got to go to break because I know our sponsors want to get their word in. But before we do that, what suggestions would you have for, especially for some of our listeners who have never gone through this exercise, as far as really, what is the best way to determine, because when you talk about something being urgent but possibly not important, but then something being important but not urgent, for folks that have never heard this concept, what suggestions would you have for helping them determine the difference between urgent and important?
I would spend a week doing an audit of your day. And what I mean by this is for a week, it's going to sound like a daunting task, but it actually goes pretty easy. Just either have a piece of paper out on your desk, or if you have a, just Google Doc on your computer, basically just throughout the day, every day for a week, Monday through Friday or whatever it may be, just write down every main task that you've worked on or you're working on during that day. Do this for an entire week. And once you've done that, then kind of categorize these in these four quadrants. And once you've done that, then you can start to look at what's in each of these quadrants and then almost rank in the quadrants what you've put into them with these lists. And once you've done that, I bet the ones that are at the bottom of the list in each of these quadrants, I bet you'll find out that some of those that you might have thought were important and urgent maybe are actually just urgent, or maybe it'll give you a very visual representation of how many are in each of these four quadrants, but also, kind of give you the ability to compare and contrast, like, all right, these 5 things are in the quadrant A, urgent and important, but these 3 are really urgent and important. These other 2, you know what? I think if I scheduled these and put these into quadrant 2, I'd be able to be just as successful with getting them done. So just having that visual, and the only way you can really do that is by just auditing your day. And everybody, for the most part, I would assume, has not totally identical days. So doing it for a week, that it gives you a little bit of a ability to catch a few maybe curveballs that came at you that week, and make sure you include those on here too, just to have a little bit better well-rounded perspective on this stuff.
One thing that's really unique about what I do in mortgage banking, and this is probably true for most entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, is there's a part of what I do that is very technical that only I can do, credit analyzing. But there's also a part of me that I have to be able to network and connect with others. I need to be on the phone, connecting with clients, past customers. I also need to be marketing, staying in touch with my past customers, sending out postcards, making sure that my online database is sending out, the information and the materials that I need to, social media, also replying to more administrative tasks as far as replying to emails, internal emails. And since I have been reading this book, and over my career I've had assistants, and in some cases multiple assistants. I've had entire teams before, but right now, as the market has contracted over the last couple of months, it's just been me. And so what I've been finding is that when you get stuck doing things that are urgent but not important, what you're referencing, it's not allowing me to take those next steps in my business, because I'm doing it. I'm stuck in doing the things that are urgent, but not always doing the things that are important, that are going to allow me to kind of take things to the next level. And so it gives you a totally different perspective. And then when you start to assign dollar amounts or hourly rates to the task that I'm doing, like I'm doing this thing for an hour or maybe even several hours. How much would it cost to have someone else do this? And is this, because if someone else was doing this at a fraction of the cost, I would then be able to go use my time for something that is much more intentional and revenue producing. So learning how to do that, and I think doing the time audit, what you suggested, is a great way to get started. And I think that is, like we talked about at the top of the podcast here, that's kind of step zero, just auditing yourself. Where is your time going? How are you spending your time on what things? So I think the time audit for a week, I think that's a great suggestion. So thank you for recommending that. I know he's literally barking at us to get to the break here. So here we go. This week's episode is brought to you by Adam Sells Denver, because in 2025, real estate isn't just about buying and selling, it's about winning. The market is shifting, interest rates are changing, and the ones who win know how to play the game. I love that. That's why Adam Sells Denver and I are teaming up for a brand new monthly live masterclass webinar. We'll cover everything you need to know to buy a home and succeed in today's market. For dates and details, follow Adam Sells Denver on social media or visit webinar.adamsellsdenver.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, you guys. So, talking now about just implementing and some of these action steps. I'll let Ben kind of take the lead on this, but we basically put together 4 steps, and these are just trying to create some actionable takeaways for you guys if you do want to, kind of try and implement this into your lives. So, Ben, let's start with just the step 1 that we put together. Explain that one.
So step 1 is going to be a brain dump and categorize. So take 5 to 10 minutes each morning or night and write down everything you need to do that day or the next day if you're doing it the night before. And then once you've done that, take it a step further and sort each task clearly into the 4 quadrants. That's something that I have always done. I've always written out kind of a game plan for the next day. I do that the night before. When I log on in the morning, I'm not figuring out what I need to do. I already know. I already have my playbook planned for the next day. But then learning to take that to the next step and categorize these things. And so essentially what I will do is I'll write everything down, what I need to do. And then I will then go and categorize it. And then I will outline, and then I'll kind of almost make a new list again based off of urgent and important. What are things that need to get done right away, then important, then urgent, and then just kind of some of those extra things that are non-critical. That has helped me tremendously. Step two, quadrant check in. Start your day focusing on the first quadrant, the tasks that are urgent and important. Then prioritize and schedule at least one quadrant two activity each day, like exercise, personal development, or family time. What's great about what we've done and how we have been really focusing on our personal growth is that we're doing quadrant two things as soon as we get up in the morning. We're going to the gym. We're doing some reading a lot of times, maybe listening to a podcast on the way into the gym. And so once you start to build that momentum and you're doing things that are important, you're focusing on kind of some of those long-term habits and activities that are going to improve your mindset. It can be very, you realize the growth that's happening, even if it feels like it's slow. You just start to become more confident. Have you experienced that too?
Yeah, definitely. I think I want to just give one other comment on that step one about the brain dump and categorizing. This is also a great way just to have that visual resource on your desk somewhere just to visually see all this stuff. And what I like to also do is just kind of use this as a, I don't know, it's kind of like your parents keeping you in line. It's like you can't do any of the quadrant four tasks, like your social media scrolling or whatever it is. You know, basically, you can't even look at that. You can't even touch that. That's like the dessert. You can't even do any of that stuff until everything in quadrant one is complete. It again just kind of is a very visual, easy way just to see where your priorities are at and what's the most important for the day. And then as far as the step two with the quadrant check in, it talks about prioritizing at least one of these being scheduled a day. Well, this could be a whole separate episode, but I also really love the concept that Andy Frisella, one of my favorite entrepreneurs, has talked a lot about. He actually has a whole book about it, all about, he has it called the power list, which is just these 5 tasks he puts down every day. They don't have to be the same tasks every day, but basically it's these 5 non-negotiable things you have to get done before the end of the day. And it could be business, personal related, whatever. But it's kind of the same idea as this goes, where you're just, adding on more to your plate. And what happens is the more organized you get, fast forward a month and you realize, oh my gosh, I can actually do twice as much in a day that I was doing a month ago just because I'm now organized and I'm prioritizing my tasks and I'm not wasting all of this time between one project to the next because I don't know what to do. If you ever have days where you just are kind of feeling lost where you don't know what to work on, that's just kind of wasted time versus by having some of this structure with your quadrants, you immediately know, what else needs to get done and just keeps you kind of more motivated and on track.
What you're describing is to go fast, go slow. So start by going slow so you can go fast. I came across that quote today on social media. I've heard it before, but it kind of pops up again today as a reminder, and that's so true. What you're describing is when you are more prepared, you're more organized, you have your power list, you have the things written out, and you know what quadrant they're in. That is going to take some time. Let's be real. So many times when I get up or when I start my day, I have this almost anxiety where I gotta like get right into my workflow and like start doing this, but then I have to like pause and say, okay, where am I starting? What am I focusing on? And that is where I learned to start creating these lists, because when you create the list, it does take some time. And that's why I suggest doing it the night before. That way you can jump right in the following morning, where if I do it that the day of, I'm just feeling a little more stressed already, and I don't like that. What I prefer to do is just write down the 3 or 4 things that I'm grateful for, and then transition and already have all these steps done. But it is going to take some time. Build that into your end of day. It's going to be 5 or 10 minutes, but then your mornings and the start of your workday the following day, you will feel so much more capable, confident, and competent. You'll be ready to roll. All right, step 3, setting boundaries and delegate. Identify tasks in quadrant 3 that could be delegated or limited. Practice politely saying no or setting boundaries around your time. Sounds small, might sound insignificant, but so important.
Hmm. Yeah, the realization for me on this one was when I got my first virtual assistant. I've a team now at this point of people in the Philippines that help me out, and being able to kind of realize how capable other people can be if you just empower them and at least give them enough time initially to clearly describe what it is you're trying to accomplish. And just by doing that, delegating becomes so much easier. Not to too into this, but one of my really good buddies and another mentor friend of mine, Eli, who's part of the legit agents that I'm with my real estate stuff. He talks a lot about delegation and how it's basically this 10-80-10 rule where you put 10% initially upfront yourself into just describing whatever it is the task you're trying to get accomplished, describing this and explaining it to your virtual assistant, or maybe it's just your secretary or somebody else in your office, or it could be anybody. So that's that first 10%. And then you give it to them to handle the next 80% of whatever that task is. But the kicker here is that final 10% is you making sure you don't just assume that it's done and leave it at that. The last 10% is then going back, reviewing, tweaking it, making sure it's exactly what you were expecting, and just kind of putting that finishing touch on. But that 10-80-10 rule with delegation is huge. And it's something I think that can really help you guys if you are running into issues where you're just feeling like you're underwater with too many things on your plate. You can't get enough done. You don't have enough daylight in the day to accomplish your stuff that you're trying to work on.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you brought that up because that's also in the book that I'm reading, Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. He specifically talks about that, the 10-80-10 rule. And he also gives historical examples. I don't know if you were aware of this, but that is how Andy Warhol became so famous. He would kind of, identify what his enthusiasm was or what his inspiration was. And then he would hire other artists and they would start to put it in motion. And then he would come back in when they were done and then kind of put his finishing touches on it that only he could. So he learned to leverage other people's time and still put his personal touch on everything when they were doing most of the work. And that's how he became one of the greatest selling artists of all time. He was also hated for this.
I was going to say,
a lot of other artists, hated him for that. But from a business perspective, he looked at his art as a business, and he was one of the first artists to do that.
So he had one of his other delegated people draw up the can of soup, and then Andy came back and just wrote Campbell's tomato soup on it and called it a day and made 20 million off it probably.
Yeah, and just like redid the font.
Yeah. What's the fourth and final step?
All right, fourth and final step is commit to quadrant 2. Schedule protected blocks of time daily or weekly for critical quadrant 2 activities. These tasks, like skill building, health, relationships, and planning, have the greatest long-term impact. Let me just share a couple comments and then I'll pass the mic over to you. I've gotten really good at doing this for my health and wellness activities. So running, working out with you. I'm running pretty much 6 or 7 days a week. I'm hitting the gym 6 or 7 days a week. At this point, I'm really reading daily. I'm doing my devotional daily. So from that perspective, I've really developed those habits. But also, again, kind of going back to the business planning, if you're a solopreneur and you're doing all of these different tasks, you have to be so intentional about this because it's so easy to get caught up doing those things that are urgent but really aren't important. And when you do that, you're not able to continue that momentum, or your trajectory might even change. And so that's why it's so important to really truly make these important tasks in quadrant 2 a priority, because this is where your long-term success is going to come from. And I look at you, someone who has just gotten so consistent with your social media and your content and your newsletters. I mean, you're killing it. You're doing this stuff. And that is what I would say 99% of real estate agents and just other professionals struggle with. It's the daily consistent content, or the reaching out. And you were just, you have gotten so good at that. I mean, the emails are daily. The shorts and the reels are daily. You have your long-term videos. I mean, it is coming out every single day.
Thanks, man. Yeah, a lot of that comes down to having systems and processes. Some of these words we're using are words that are probably sounding really boring to a lot of people. But I guarantee if you took the top 100 most successful people personally, or, just thinking of the top 100 people you can think of that are very successful in life, it doesn't necessarily have to be financial either. It could also be athletics or just relationships, anything. I guarantee you that the majority of those people, if not almost all of them, have a very consistent schedule that they follow on a daily basis. Very, very important to have that. And something like having a Google Calendar, everybody for the most part, I think, has a Google Calendar or an Apple Calendar, some form of a calendar on their phone, on their email service that they use. But there's a whole nother level to not just having a calendar, but truly not only executing, having all these different scheduled activities in there, but also actually respecting those and actually doing them. I would recommend from a business perspective, starting off with having on the business and in the business tasks and having a specific amount of time you dedicate to each of those. And when those time slots come up on your calendar, you respect that. You actually work on that. You don't just see that and say, you know what, today it's a nice day outside. I'm going to just go outside and, hang out at the park for an hour instead. You got to, you have to respect the calendar, which is just as much important. And then the other thing I'll just share with you guys too is on your calendar, put your personal tasks too, as simple as they sound. Put workout from 6 to 7 a.m. in your calendar. Share your calendar potentially with your significant other. If you guys have a shared calendar with certain aspects, you don't have to share your entire calendar, but you can have certain types of your calendar shared with each other. That way you can make sure that other scheduled activities in that quadrant two are happening on your personal relationships. Wednesday night, going out on date night or whatever it may be, just having that accountability with your partner, I think is really, really important. And the last thing I'll say is just, again, when it comes to scheduling is this is something that does not just happen overnight. I've been really intentional about this for like almost 2 years now, and I'm still not where I really want to
It's a
be with
skill,
this.
isn't it? I mean, it's a
Very
skill.
difficult, very
Yeah,
difficult
it
to
definitely is a
execute.
skill. And, kind of to your point about putting the personal things on the calendar, I think that's really important too, because then you can see and you can take some pride and satisfaction in all of those things that you're accomplishing. And when you have those on the calendar, you can see exactly what you're doing, and it helps build that momentum and keep that momentum and keep it moving forward. So I love that.
Mhm. Well, I think we both kind of already shared some of our personal experiences with this, so I don't think we need to really necessarily share too much more on that, unless you have something, Ben, that you want to share on the kind of the real life application piece. Do you have anything else?
I was gonna say the same thing. I think we shared some personal stuff. So let's
Yeah, let me just kind
recap.
of let me recap and kind of challenge the audience for a few things. So again,
So hey,
guys,
let's challenge the audience.
you like that? You like that?
Let's challenge the audience. Yeah.
All right. So today we broke down how the Eisenhower Matrix can transform your productivity by helping you identify what's truly important and urgent. So remember, a couple things here, guys. Do what's urgent and important. Schedule what's important but not urgent. Delegate or limit what's urgent but not important. And eliminate what's neither urgent nor important. If you guys can just take that little piece right there, write that down, keep that somewhere where you're seeing this on a frequent basis just to remind yourselves, I think that can be a huge game changer for you guys. And that's kind of my homework or your actionable task on my end to do is just, again, to write those down and just to start thinking through on every task you're doing on a daily and weekly basis, which quadrant do they fall into?
Yeah, and then start tomorrow. Take 5 minutes today and categorize tomorrow's tasks. So start today. Don't start tomorrow. Start today. Categorize tomorrow's tasks using the matrix and commit to focusing intentionally on something in quadrant two. And just focus on that. Focus on quadrant two. Do something, plan something, and then cross it off when you've done it, and just see how your life changes, and then do it again the next day.
Yeah, love that. I think this was a good episode, guys. If any of this resonated with you, share it with somebody you know, anybody you think might also get some value and maybe needs this. Maybe they're, a great person, but they're just feeling anytime you talk to them like they're just underwater and really struggling just to kind of get a little bit of momentum behind them. This is a great tool just to kind of help at any level of life that somebody's at, whether they're just kind of getting going in their career or they're a 30-year veteran CEO. I mean, this can be applied to any walk of life, personal or professional.
That's right. And if you want to continue leveling up your personal and professional life, stay connected with us at the Pursuit of Progress. Have a positive and productive week ahead. This is Benjamin Adams signing off for Adam Lang on the Pursuit of Progress. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
See you guys.